Folks, thanks a lot for the 80,000 subscribers. You guys are awesome. But we're not stopping here. Let's push it, folks, to 100,000 subscribers. So give that support to the channel and subscribe and hit that like button down below to reach our goal of 153 likes. And now let's go for it. Everything starts with a tale of a hero who, like others, destroys everything that causes suffering and seeks to heal the pain of those who need to be saved. However, every hero awaits a premature end, whether through the betrayal of someone he trusted or by falling into an enemy's trap. Once, one of these heroes was so powerful that people avoided him out of fear that he continued to save those in need at the cost of his own heart. When the world was saved on the brink of death, he prayed to the gods to grant a wish in his next reincarnation. Next, a boy named Alan wakes up with his brother screaming his name because their father is calling. This brother despises Alan for being lazy and undeserving of the comfort he has, wishing their father would be stricter with the older brother's behavior. But he believes today is the day everything will change. So Alan arrives in the throne room where his father mentions that the boy was born into the Westphalt ducal family 15 years ago, yet he never advanced past level 1. And worst of all, at the blessing ceremony held the previous day, Alan received no gift, even though every child in this world receives a gift from the gods. For this reason, Alan's father sees him as a failure who embarrasses the family name, being the heir of the Westphalt family, so he kicks his son out of the house. Outside the gates, Alan celebrates being free from such an unbearable duke after being reincarnated. Now he could follow his own path and seek the inner peace he so desired in his past life. For this, the boy wanders to the borderlands in the east of Westphalt, where he hopes for a peaceful life far from trouble, unlike his previous incarnation where people feared him. On his way to his destination, he finds a good place to rest before continuing his journey, but spots in the distance a knight named Beatrice, who is facing alone some stone dogs. She tears the beasts apart, but they quickly regenerate, leaving her companion, Lise, in danger. Beatrice asks her friend to flee, but Lise doesn't want to leave and abandon the knight alone with these beasts. Watching the scene, Alan recognizes the first princess of the kingdom of Adostella, Lise Adostella, and wonders what princess would be doing in a place like that. Then we're taken to a memory where Lise overhears the guests at a ceremony mocking Alan, the heir of the ducal house of Adostella, calling him a coward, and that Craig is surely devastated for having lost his wife and being left with his failed son. Lise rages against the men, saying Alan is a very decent boy. Faced with this memory, the boy thinks he could prevent harm from happening to the girl who defended him so much. At that moment, Beatrice takes a hard blow and falls to the ground, leaving the princess defenseless. So Alan rushes at great speed toward the danger, where Lise had already accepted death and finds it strange that all she can think of at that moment is Alan. Because of this, she calls out the boy's name before being attacked by the dogs, and at the same moment, the boy had saved the princess in time, asking her if someone happened to call his name. Lise wants to know how Alan ended up there at that moment, but the boy is busy dealing with the other beasts that are still a threat. So he charges against them and uses his divine eyes, identifying the cores that are the weak points of his enemies. Focusing on this, Alan invokes the end of the world and blossoming of 100 flowers' ability to launch several swords at the targets. With that, the threat had been defeated, but Beatrice was still in danger of losing her life. Alan recognizes Beatrice from ancient times and promises to heal her wounds and uses a technique from the parallel paradox to completely erase the warrior's wounds, even restoring her armor. Faced with so much power, Lise asks how her friend reached this level, and he tries to hide the fact that he inherited it from a past life, while Beatrice supposes it's a gift from a level that the church itself is unaware of. As the princess buys into this idea, the boy confirms that's the case, getting rid of that for now. Next, he asks why the princess is in a place like this, and she tells him she received a divine revelation a few days ago. It wasn't any precise information, but the princess's gift said she could prevent an ill omen if she paid attention to the words spoken. Through this revelation, the two were guided to Clume village on the border, but they were attacked on the way. According to Beatrice, if it weren't for Alan, the two might have been killed. Then the princess returns the question and also wants to know what Alan is doing there, but the boy prefers to talk in a carriage right behind them. Lise comments that it's broken, but Alan rebuilds the carriage using another healing light magic from the parallel paradox. Soon, with Beatrice on the horse's reins, Alan says he was expelled from the Westphalt family and also intends to go to the borders of that domain. He asks if the princess allows it, since a servant with his skills would be very useful for training. Beatrice comments that obviously he would need to be returned, considering the crown's interests, but Princess Lise decides to put her friend ahead of the kingdom, although it makes her unsuitable for royalty. As night falls, the three arrive at a village where everything is too empty and quiet, and Alan doesn't even feel the presence of monsters nearby. Beatrice points out that the team wasn't attacked after Alan joined, and the boy thinks it's because perhaps the monsters are afraid of something and are avoiding the village. However, a little further ahead, they find the villagers gathered in front of a structure from which a girl was expelled by a man. Lice recognizes this girl as the light sent to her as a sign, and her name is Akira. On the other hand, Akira has no idea who the girl speaking to her is, so the princess introduces herself, offended for not being recognized, since she showed the entire palace to the girl and even had lunch with her. Alan wants to know what this light talk is about, so Beatrice explains that it comes from a gift called Valiant, so rare that it's only given to one person in each generation, granting the power of 1,000 warriors to the bearer. In this current generation, the heroine who carries the strongest gift is Akira Kazuragi, and the revelation that Lies received was, become a guide to the light and eliminate the darkness. Soon, the group gathers to quell their hunger, and Akira reveals she was wandering aimlessly until she stumbled upon this village where a child told her she had nearly been sacrificed to the dragon residing in the mountains nearby. Thus, Akira sought details from the village chief, but he warned her not to interfere. Confronted with this, Alan speculates they allow the dragon to stay for protection, as in a small village like this, monster attacks are a matter of life or death, which would explain the abnormal absence of monsters in the region. Akira agrees with the boy's assumption and soon reveals she instructed the girl who was offered as a sacrifice to hide in a cave nearby until everything was resolved. However, now that she's had her fill and there's nothing interesting in this place, Akira decides to slay the dragon once and for all and calls on those who wish to accompany her. Alan considers the possibility that the villagers may not want to rid themselves of the dragon and that killing it could cause a conflict, but Akira promised to help the child, and that's what she's going to do. After the heroine departs, Lise and Beatrice decide to join her, and eventually Alan follows suit because he doesn't want to enjoy peace and tranquility on the frontier while his friends are in danger. Just in front of the mountain where the dragon resides, Akira gathers the group to devise a strategy. She will approach the peak via the main road, while the rest will circle around from behind to surround the creature. Alan questions whether it wouldn't be better for him to go in front instead of Akira, but the heroine refuses his request, sensing that the boy is the type to handle things on his own. Alan downplays it, saying he's being overestimated, but Akira insists that the boy is no ordinary person, leaving everyone looking at him with a question mark. Finally, Akira reveals that she intends to throw down with the boy, but only after defeating the dragon. Then she sets off ahead following her strategy and urges the rest of the people to hurry, or else she'll take down the beast alone. With everyone aware of their roles, the trio scales the mountain slopes, and Alan worries about the princess, but she assures him she knows a thing or two about self-defense. Meanwhile, Beatrice finds it curious that the Westfelds, who pride themselves on their military might, haven't discovered a dragon within their borders. In turn, Alan believes that his old family and this dragon have some kind of connection, and therefore there has been no conflict between them. He goes further, suggesting that perhaps the village of Clume was built precisely for the purpose of offering sacrifices. With this, Beatrice agrees that maintaining an agreement with the dragon would keep the border secure, but Alan believes that is only a consequence of this relationship, and that the real purpose is much worse than that. At this moment, the dragon senses Akira's presence and attacks the heroine, who retaliates by invoking the Sovereign of Lightning. She believes this will do the trick, but the dragon emerges unscathed, mocking the human and questioning if this is some kind of joke. In response to the creature's arrogance, Akira decides not to go easy in this fight. But the dragon points out that innocent people may become victims of this crossfire, turning its head toward the small girl who was offered as a sacrifice. Akira asks how the dragon found this child, and it responds that it let her escape on purpose because its intention was never to devour humans but to enjoy seeing the despair on their faces because a dragon's life is too long not to kill time with such interesting activities. Therefore, it released the offering just to see what would happen next. Faced with this insolence, Akira fills with hatred and attacks the dragon with a final blow of celestial blue lightning destruction. Convinced she has defeated the enemy, she turns around only to see the monster unharmed and further mocking the heroine's weakness. Then it strikes the girl forcefully, claiming it's ridiculous for someone so useless to call themselves a hero. Immobilized, Akira realizes there is an abyss of power between them, while the dragon fills its mouth with fire. However, as it was about to unleash the final blow, Alan appears and tears off one of its wings. Alan stands in front of Akira to protect her and taunts the dragon, mentioning the arrogance it has shown so far, so the creature angrily advances towards the humans. Alan asks Elise to take care of the heroine and for Beatrice to take the child, then he invokes an ability called Demon Assassin's Sword, causing enormous damage to the enemy. The creature wonders how it can be injured by a mere human with a blunt blade since it is the Red Dragon King, the living being closest to a god. Alan acknowledges that this monster is on a different level, but watching the battle between him and Akira, he believes he can win with his technique of the end of the world. However, the dragon plays dirty and uses the rest of the group as helpless shields. However, Lise motivates Alan to do what must be done, and in that moment, he remembers that he lost the ability to face people since he began to be called a failure. Still, he sees that Lise awakens a strange courage within him, so he charges at the dragon, who decides to end everyone at once, but the mysterious warrior uses the light, the supreme ability of the end of the world, and as the intense glow of the weapon pierces the creature's armor, the darkness of the sky dissipates along with a red dragon king and its scales fall from the sky like a petal shower. Shortly after, Akira awakens and embraces the child she promised to save, while Alan reflects that saving a princess and helping a hero kill a dragon wasn't the kind of peaceful life he wanted. But when Lise extends her hand to the boy, he realizes that a small detour on the path isn't harmful. The next day, Alan wakes up startled and apologizes for having slept for too long, but Lise reassures the boy, after all, the battle against the Red Dragon King must have been very exhausting. So Alan asks where the others are, and the princess points to the middle of the field, where Akira and Beatrice are facing off in a training duel. Then Lise takes the opportunity to explain her ability to heal people that she demonstrated earlier. However, Alan mentions hearing stories about a miraculous saint who heals any illness or injury at the doorsteps of homes in need, expressing surprise that it's the princess. Nevertheless, to him, whether she's a princess or a miraculous saint, Lise remains just herself. With that said, an atmosphere of affection grows between the two, but Akira shouts for Alan to train with them, disrupting the intimate moment. Sometime later, the adventurers bid farewell to Akira and the little rescued girl. They invited the heroine to join their journey, but she doesn't get along well with carriages, preferring to walk instead. Lise asks if Akira is sure she wants to stay with the child, and she responds that the two have already bonded, and besides, her family no longer exists, so returning her to the same village isn't a good idea. The little girl rejoices at this opportunity to start a new life, while Akira apologizes to Alan for the broken sword, feeling that she should have been the one to kill that dragon instead of leaving everything to the boy. Therefore, Akira feels inadequate and intends to hand over the sacred sword to someone worthy of it, which in this case is Alan. Humbly, Alan responds that he was only able to win with Akira's help, and that to the little girl by her side, Akira is the only hero that matters around there. Thus, the two bid farewell and go their separate ways without the rest of the team. In the late afternoon at the Westphalt family palace, Alan's father informs a mysterious man in a suit that the Red Dragon King was defeated when trying to lure the heroine into an ambush. The man in the suit assumes that she had the help of the saint, so the Duke realizes that there's more to it. Alan's younger brother rages over the dragon's death, lamenting that the clay dogs weren't able to eliminate the princess, promising to send a whole pack next time to avoid the risk of failure again. However, the Duke reminds them that the dragon's death caused a limitation of material, so they can't waste magical life forms. The boy thinks this thriftiness will let the princess escape, but the Duke assures that as long as the targets are within Westphalt lands, opportunities to catch her won't be lacking. However, more importantly, the Duke wants to know if that elf has been found, and the unknown man responds that there's no need to hurry because soon he'll deliver the elf's head to the noble. With the departure of the man in the suit, the Duke rejoices at the opportunity to bury these annoying god's puppets and avenge the Westphalt family. Meanwhile, in the carriage, Alan asks about a friend of Lise who is a blacksmith, and she explains that this blacksmith lives in a city not far from there called Granholm. Lise would love to ask her friend to make a new sword for Alan. He in turn is surprised to hear about cities on the border, while Beatrice asserts that their friend is a good professional despite there not being many elven blacksmiths. Then Lise apologizes to Alan for her revelation, putting him in this whole situation, and intends to give the sword as a reward. Alan accepts the gift but asks if the princess shouldn't return to the capital. She explains that she has already informed her father, besides being with Beatrice. As night falls, the group sets up a camp to sleep, and Beatrice offers to light a fire, but Alan uses his power to create fire for everyone, leaving the warrior stunned. Lise is exhausted and ends up falling asleep on her friend's shoulder, and Beatrice teases, saying they're engaged, so there's no problem with that. But Lise makes it clear they're no longer engaged and she doesn't want to sleep on the boy's lap. Despite her speech, she ends up sleeping on Alan's shoulder, who realizes that this is the first moment of tranquility since he arrived in this world, and remembers that it was also a beautiful moonlit night the first time he met Lise. On that day, she found Alan on a balcony and introduced herself to him, starting a conversation about the beauty of the night. Furthermore, she reveals that she's counting on the boy from now on. After all, they're engaged, and Alan is confused by this news. The next morning, they arrive in Granholm, a place so lively that it didn't seem like a border town, according to Alan. Beatrice explains that travelers and wanderers often pass through this type of city precisely because it's on the border. Soon, they all arrive at the blacksmith's house, but it seems that the elf isn't home. Alan notices that the door is unlocked, so the girls enter and call out for their friend Noelle, while Alan admires the perfection of the craftsmanship of those weapons inside. At that moment, Lee screams upon seeing Noelle unconscious on the floor, but Beatrice assures that it's just the elf's usual heavy sleep. With that, the saint heals her friend, and the bodyguard explains that Noelle doesn't eat, drink, or sleep when she starts making a weapon, and therefore passes out from exhaustion. The princess has already asked her to take it easy with work, but she never listens. At that moment, the blacksmith wakes up and sees her friends whom she hadn't seen in so long but wants to know who the guy next to them is. So he's introduced as Alan, one of Lisa's guards who asks the elf to forge a sword for him. However, Noelle has too many orders lined up, so she doesn't have time for that. Lys is frustrated and Beatrice understands the blacksmith's side, who grumbles that this man already has a sword. Alan shows that the weapon is broken and the elf feels ashamed for someone so clumsy wanting to wield a weapon made by her. However, upon picking up the sword, she notices that it was used to its limit to break like that, which intrigues the blacksmith to the point of her changing her mind and agreeing to make another blade for the warrior. She asks if Alan wants a sword that surpasses the sacred sword, simply the most powerful weapon she could produce. After all, only a few people are capable of wielding such equipment, and Noelle believes Alan is one of those people. With that said, the boy has no reason to refuse, so Ferreira prepares to start the work by pushing all the visitors out. Alone inside the house, the elf remembers Vanessa, a blacksmith she greatly admired in her childhood, and immediately promises to produce a weapon that will surpass the sacred sword. As she leaves, Lys hopes that Noelle doesn't overdo it with work, and Alan suggests that the group find an inn to stay in while waiting for the sword to be ready. Nearby, a woman reveals herself and intends to report what she's seeing. Soon she tells the man in the suit that the saint was seen with her bodyguard and another warrior, and the man is surprised because he thought the princess would only be accompanied by Beatrice, so he plans to investigate the matter. Meanwhile, at a nearby inn, Alan asks what they're going to do during these days, and Beatrice recommends that he do what he's always wanted, relax and not worry. However, Lys suggests he visit the Adventurers Guild to sell the items the dragon dropped, and Alan thinks it's a good idea to cover the hotel expenses. With that decided, the girls decide to take a stroll around the city in Alan's absence. With the boy gone, Beatrice questions whether the two of them alone will really be able to handle this matter, but Lys prefers not to involve Alan in it. Shortly after, the warrior finds the guild and shows the dragon scales he looted, and the receptionist is impressed to have such a rare item on the counter. Unsure of what to do, she takes some and rushes to speak to the manager, leaving Alan empty-handed. At that moment, the man in the suit takes advantage of the situation to approach Alan and ask for details about the dragon's scales the boy is carrying. Seeing his lack of manners, the man takes off his hat and introduces himself properly as Horace, along with his friend Mylena, a rare Amazon to be found in these lands. Horace explains that he never tires of hearing adventurers' stories, so he wants to know if Alan obtained these dragon scales alone. In turn, the boy mentions that he had the heroine's help, and Horace becomes intrigued by this conversation. But the attendant returns at that moment, claiming to have assessed the value of the scales. Alan looks back at the mysterious man, but he had disappeared along with his companion. Outside, Horace comments to Mylene that he never imagined that the man accompanying the princess is just a useless person without talent, but the Amazon feels something in that young man that bothers her a lot, although Horace thinks he is not a problem. Days later, the trio returns to Noelle's blacksmith, hoping the sword is ready, but once again she was passed out on the ground. After being healed, Noelle points to the most powerful weapon she could forge, and as Alan wields the blade, he is sure it's a great sword. Noelle wants to test the weapon right away, but Lys warns that she won't be healing the elf all the time. Still, the blacksmith chooses to accompany the boy because only by observing the sword will she know if any adjustments are needed. Alan notices the girl's perfectionism and asks why she decided to be a blacksmith. She questions if it's strange for an elf to have this profession, and Alan believes it is because of the characteristics of the race's talent, and that's why dwarves are usually more suited to it. Then Noelle reveals that she was raised by a dwarf and doesn't know where she was born or who her parents are, but only remembers being in an unknown place, wandering aimlessly, until she was rescued by Vanessa. Vanessa was persistent, clumsy, and stubborn. She never wanted to teach Noelle how to make a sword, but she was still an important master for the elf. But instead of finishing the story, Noelle says it doesn't matter and runs away to avoid exposing herself so personally. So Horace takes advantage of the opportunity to appear once again, commenting that you would love to hear more stories like that when they return to the city. Alan notices that there's something strange about this man and this Amazon, but before the conversation evolves, Noelle hurries the boy to continue with the sword test. The elf observes Horace and thinks he's someone she knows, but she soon gives up the idea. As they move away, the man in the suit comments to Mylene that probably that boy didn't pry into their affairs, so he asks the Amazon to keep an eye on Alan so he doesn't uncover the secret. Returning to the warrior, he tests the sacred sword, and after defeating some creatures with it, he is satisfied with the blade, so Noel borrows the weapon and reveals her talent, an ability to see conditions invisible to normal eyes in this type of weapon. So analyzing the angle, speed, and impeccable position with which Alan wields the sword, she is sure that her vision of him was correct as being the ideal user of the sacred sword. Still, she finds it interesting to see how the boy fares against a stronger monster, so she calls him to continue on the path ahead. Venturing deeper into the forest, they arrive at a place where Noel swears there have always been many monsters, but since it's empty, she supposes they are afraid of Alan's presence. However, the boy is sure it's not fear of him, but of something else nearby. So he casts a spell that disperses the fog, revealing a huge wolf that terrifies Noel, reminding her that it was this creature that swallowed Vanessa. Faced with this, she stammers in fear until she asks Alan to use the sacred sword and end the wild beast. At this moment, we return to Noel's past, where she tries to get Vanessa's attention, who is deeply focused on her work. The elf insists she's hungry, visibly irritating Vanessa, who then frowns, hoping to deter the young one. However, hours pass and the blacksmith was still hard at work, while Noel had managed to scrounge up something to eat. Approaching Vanessa, the elf asks how she manages to use all these different tools, but Vanessa remains silent. Irritated by being ignored, Noel misbehaves, lifting a huge sword with her hands, but loses balance and falls, knocking over several things on the nearby shelf. Even so, Noel hadn't gained the attention she sought, so she decides to back off and sit near the dwarf again. Noel asks what's so great about hammering on a sword all day, especially when it leads to feeling sick from not eating or drinking anything for days. Seeing she won't get what she wants from a distance, the petit one approaches Vanessa, repeatedly calling her dumb for not even knowing how to speak, but even this tactic fails. The next day, Noel sleeps anywhere in the house while the hammering continues incessantly until suddenly, Vanessa interrupts her work. Proud of the sword she has forged, Vanessa lifts it with a smile while Noel watches with curiosity. After that, we return to the present moment where Noel insists that Alan kill the beast, but he says he has no reason to, as the wolf is just sleeping in its corner, away from humans. He asserts he doesn't wish to take on the elf's vengeance, so Noel takes the boy's sword to seek justice herself. However, Alan advises her against it, explaining that the creature Fenrir has a barrier that nullifies any attack below a certain level. This sword, for instance, wouldn't even scratch the monster, and he reminds Noel that she knows this, as she has yet to create a weapon stronger than the sacred sword. With that, Alan leaves the decision in the elf's hands. Upon returning to the lodging, the warrior informs the rest of the group about the giant beast in the border region. He believes someone brought that Fenrir to this territory because the animal was concealed by some kind of magic, and Alan has a hunch about the reason. Before that, he asks if Lise and Beatrice reveal their true purpose, and the girls realize they can't hide anything from him. So Lise explains that about 3 months ago, the famous General Searle, one of the kingdom's strongest, was murdered. No one knows why, but the assailant took the general's head with him. Many spells were used to try to uncover the motive, but it's still unknown to this day. Suspicions suggest the culprit is a demon, as these beings use magics unknown to humans. But since demons aren't known for killing humans and caring about politics, perhaps he's under someone else's orders. For all these reasons, Lise and Beatrice were investigating this case in this city, and after some thought, Alan believes he has a suspect. Meanwhile, at the border, Mylene wonders who managed to undo the Fenrir's camouflage, as it's not something simple to do. Therefore, she believes she's dealing with a more dangerous enemy than Horace imagines. When she returns to her boss to report her mission, he informs her that he will soon make his move because his time in this city is up, so Mylene must bring the elves and the saints' heads. Seeing the girl seem frightened by the request, Horace questions how a feared Amazon can be so sensitive, and when the magical subordination collar appears on the girl, the man makes it clear he won't accept a no as an answer. Meanwhile, Noel is crafting new weapons and remembers when Alan said that depending on how his sword is refined, maybe one day it can even harm Fenrir. Noel asks the boy to tell her everything he knows about it, and agreeing, Alan asks the elf not to be reckless with what he's about to teach her. Persistent in her goal, Noel is sure that one day she will be able to surpass the sacred sword, but her exhaustion had reached the point of making her fall asleep again. Then a nightmare of the moment when the Fenrir attacked her home occurs, and Noel is trapped under the debris that fell from the ceiling. Vanessa tries to fight the Fenrir, while Horace admits she is a great blacksmith, but that's a problem for him because he doesn't want anyone to be able to produce weapons superior to the sacred swords. At that moment, Vanessa advances against the wolf, but a magical shield he possesses shatters her sword, leaving her at the mercy of the creature. After dealing with Vanessa, the Fenrir rushes toward the elf, but Akira appears and casts a lightning bolt at the monster. As the magic has no effect on him, the heroine advances and cuts him with her sword, forcing Horus to retreat along with the beast. With the enemies fleeing, Noel goes to her master's body to mourn her loss. Akira tries to convince her to tend to her wounds, but Noel questions why the heroine had a sword capable of injuring the wolf, but Vanessa didn't. Soon, the young elf embraces the weapon her master took so long to make and cries copiously in front of her body. At dawn, Noel wakes up feeling strangely light and hearing a noise outside. She thinks it's Lise, but it's Alan, checking if the blacksmith really wasn't overdoing it with work as promised. Then, after a long day's work, the blacksmith finishes another sword and returns with it to the forest where the Fenrir was last seen, apologizing to Alan for using his sword. After a long walk, Noel confronts her arch-rival and raises the blade to pierce the beast, but she hears the sound of the sword and is struck by the elf first. After Noel struggles her feet, Horus appears and is impressed that the girl wasn't incapacitated by a Fenrir swipe. Finally, he reveals that he was looking for the elf Noel Leonhardt. The elf asks if the man will kill her, just like he did with Vanessa, and upon hearing that name, Horus scratches his chin and remembers that this elf indeed seemed familiar because she was the one with the dwarf blacksmith. Because of this, Horus believes that the master and apprentice being killed by Fenrir is a twist of fate, but Noel tries to prevent it from happening. Yet when she charges at the wolf, he leaps over her and hits her back with his hind paw. With that, Horus wishes to ask one last thing before the elf is devoured. He wants to know if she would serve him because such extraordinary talent as hers would be wasted in Fenrir's stomach. This talent is the Grom Vision, the eyes of the sovereign fairy. There are only 5 known innate gifts in this world, and this is one of them. Nonetheless, Horus promises to reward the blacksmith, just as he does to this day with his subordinate Amazon, because after Horus destroyed her homeland, he took the girl away to serve him. Facing this, Noel responds that she would rather die than serve this man, so he regrets the girl's wrong decision and orders the giant wolf to finish her off, but before the final blow, Alan appears and saves his friend's life. Seeing the young man's capability, Horus confesses that he underestimated his talents, but at the same time believes it was foolish of the young man to abandon his main post to get there because if anything happens to the princess, it will be difficult to reach her in time. By the way, Mylene was already inside Lise and Beatrice's room. However, as she approached Princess Lisa's bed, it was only a tied mattress. In fact, the two were already prepared for this encounter and were waiting hidden for the Amazon's arrival. Returning to Alan, he mocks the enemy's arrogance, for at no moment did he consider Mylene being discovered. Knowing how she operates, the boy placed a barrier that nullifies invisibility around Lise. Alan has been the target of such plans so many times in his past life that he's more than accustomed to them. Horus finds it amusing that the boy mentioned his supposed past life, and he knows that even with Mylene exposed, it doesn't mean Beatrice can defeat her. In the inn room, the two warriors clash for the princess's life, but when Beatrice was about to go all out against her opponent, Lise asks her to stop immediately. With this distraction, the Amazon takes advantage and hits her opponent with her elbow, rendering her unconscious. With this, the path was clear for Mylene to finish off the princess. But instead of completing the job, the Amazon hesitated until Beatrice managed to save her friend in time. Watching the fight from afar, Alan sees that the two won't need any help and informs Horus that his execution attempt failed. Still, Horus believes he is in control of the situation, since Fenrir cannot be harmed without a sacred sword. Therefore, he orders the wolf to destroy the insolent boy, and the beast's imposing presence makes Noelle recall old visions of her trauma and scream for Alan, but the warrior manages to open a hole in the monster's body without major problems, causing Horus to flee at that moment in the face of such a great force. Soon Alan was carrying Noelle back home, taking advantage of the fact that the elf passed out after he healed her. Besides, she had spent the night forging, so sleep was expected. At that moment, Lise comes running towards her friend to see how he is. Fortunately, everyone is fine, but Noelle isn't happy when she wakes up and sees that Alan was carrying her without her permission. The next day, they assess that Mylene has been released from Horus's subordination spell, so she should be able to speak freely. Beatrice thinks it's best to take her to an official trial in the capital, but Lise believes that this girl is not evil, so she wants to find a more peaceful way to resolve the situation. The bodyguard reminds that the Amazon tried to kill the princess, but she responds that it wasn't this girl's intention. Anyway, Lise believes that Mylene has someone from her people waiting for her, but the Amazon explains that her homeland was burned, and she has nothing left, nowhere to go. At that moment, Noelle remembers when she was rescued by Vanessa, and after asking her name, the dwarf blacksmith announces that she will take the elf to her house. Soon, in a moment of empathy, the elf blacksmith cuts the Amazon's bonds and frees her, besides inviting the girl to live in her house. Beatrice argues that this woman may attack Lise at any moment, but Noel believes otherwise, and if that happens, Mylene will get a good scolding. With that, the Amazon is moved by the support she received from this strange person and starts crying. Beatrice thinks she was too harsh on the girl, but she's only crying tears of joy. Therefore, Alan realizes that today's problem is solved. Then in the middle of the night, he returns alone to the forest and casts a powerful spell. Meanwhile, Horace is far away from the protagonist, certain that he escaped death. Still, he wonders who that kid with such incredible ability is. And speaking of him, Alan had cast a spell at the exact coordinates where the old man was, so the spell hits the man and opens a rift along the way. After that, a ghastly creature approaches the man calmly. At that moment, Alan arrives to ask some things he needed to know, but it seems someone arrived before him. Then this creature returns to the Count of Westfelt and informs that he eliminated Horace to prevent the information from leaking. According to the Duke, this was the minimum to be done since the blame lies precisely with the demons. His son goes further, saying that the demons put on such a show just to not end up killing the saint or the elf in the end, so it seems they're not as good as they claim. With that, the demon expresses his dissatisfaction, frightening the boy, and he soon states that he will deal with the princess and the elf. The Cav announces that he will take care of the Archbishop's hero, but his son asks to stay with the Archbishop after all. He's not a failure like his brother and can handle this easily. In the next scene, we're taken back to a moment from Lisa's childhood, where she was escorted in her carriage along an extremely dangerous path. Suddenly, the carriage shakes violently, causing the girl's uncle to hold on to her to prevent her from getting hurt. Outside, the other soldiers shout that monsters are attacking, so the protective knight asks the girl to stay inside while he goes out to join the allies in battle. To the princess's despair, the warriors were losing against the winged creatures, and one of them manages to reach her carriage, but her uncle manages to prevent the worst from happening. However, the monster reacts to the blow taken and seriously injures the knight, who is lifted into the air by the monster, but manages to impale it with his sword and ends up falling into a ravine along with his assailant. Back in the present, the heroes walk through the peaceful village where they pause their investigation until they question some men assembling a structure if there will be any festival there. One of the workers replies that the Spirits Festival will take place, where they receive the spirits of their ancestors, and it happens once a year. As the outsiders seem frightened, another man explains that it is a specific custom of this village, and that it's nothing more than a lively event where they dress up as spirits and dance. Then Lise asks if any of them saw a person wearing silver armor around, but no one knows what she's talking about, and Beatrice begins to accept that it was just a rumor. Strangely, not even the local guild has any information, and the group seems to be going in circles in this fruitless investigation. However, Noel mentions an adventurous client who spoke about a ghost living in a village, possibly from the royal family. Filled with hatred for the oppression suffered in his family, this ghost wears a silver armor stained with blood and walks among the graves at night. While speaking, the elf wanted to scare her companions, and Beatrice falls for it by being startled by the fall of a sword. The friends make fun of her, but the bodyguard swears that she's not afraid of ghosts. Finally, they decide to go back to investigating the village, and Alan considers that if it's a demon responsible to him, this talk of spirits would be like bringing back the dead. Thus, Beatrice shows fear once again, and the girls start teasing her about it. This time, as Noel mentioned about the graves, the team resumes their investigation from the cemetery, while Beatrice can't hold back her nervousness in this dark environment. At that moment, she is surprised by a guy they saw yesterday, but this time he looks bizarre. Still, this man leads the group to the village leader's house because according to him, he's the one who will know more about what's going on in these parts. Alan questions what the man was doing in the cemetery, and he replies that he was walking around and stumbled upon the group by coincidence, and then he left. Shortly after, inside the house, the leader says that this is a quiet place, and he himself has never heard rumors about spirits and such. Then he offers his house for everyone to spend the night because the festival starts tomorrow, and they could join. Alan immediately accepts the offer, and the man goes to prepare the beds. After lying down, Lise dreams of her uncle in the beautiful palace garden wearing his typical armor and cloak. However, the girl calls her uncle Dad, and he corrects her once again. Although she likes the idea of having two fathers, the knight had just come to give his niece a kiss because he'll be away for a long time on an expedition, but he promises to come back as soon as he can. Lise doubts he's telling the truth, so the man teaches the child that believing in people is what creates connections and makes us human. Upon waking from the dream, Lise hears something outside, so she goes to the window to see what it is and sees her uncle walking away from the house. Lise runs after her uncle into the middle of the cemetery until undead rise from the graves and surround the princess. However, it was all just another dream, and since the girl was screaming, Alan went to check on her. In a few seconds, Lise catches her breath and gives a strong hug to her friend, who welcomes the girl back. The next day, as the sun sets, the Spirits Festival finally begins, and Beatrice doesn't hide that she found this celebration somewhat bizarre because treating the dead like this in her nation is a big taboo. Alan suggests that the royal knight exercise her authority to end the party, but the fearful warrior argues that no one has been hurt yet. As time passes, everything seems to be normal, but Alan can't shake off the feeling that there's something wrong with this village. Suddenly, the macabre man returns and advises the foreigners to enjoy their stay and dance too, and Lise teases Alan to take Beatrice. Analyzing the situation with his special eye, Alan accepts the proposal and leaves with the bodyguard right behind. When she's alone, Lise sees a strange purple smoke hanging in the air and someone calling her name. When she realizes it, her uncle is in the middle of the crowd of residents celebrating, so she decides to go after him once again. When she finally reaches the man in the depths of a dark forest, Lise gets scolded by her uncle for being in such a dangerous place alone, but Lise argues that she's with her dad, and all this time she wondered where he was. After he fell, a huge search was conducted, but his body was never found, and that made the princess believe that the knight was still alive. So she asks what he's been doing all this time, and the uncle replies that he hated the royal family and went into hiding to seek revenge because his brother, Lisa's father, is trying to kill him. The princess doesn't understand why, so the knight explains that the king has always been in search of natural gifts, like the power to annihilate dragons, create unparalleled weapons, double the strength of soldiers, and bring glory to the nation, the ability to identify any gift, and lastly, Lisa's saintly power. Each of these powers is capable of destroying the kingdom, and the bearers of such abilities are called puppets of the gods. Lise comments on how absurd this is, and her uncle agrees but warns that the king thinks differently. In the king's mind, the bearers of natural gifts are rebels who have come to bring destruction in the name of the gods. That's why he decided to kill them all, and Lisa's uncle wants to save her. However, even though it's true, Liz would like to try to resolve the whole situation through conversation because her uncle once said that the most important thing is always to trust people. Thus, the man agrees that he said that, but soon realizes that he has no other option but to kill Lise violently, so he draws his sword against her. But just when he was about to end his niece's life, Alan intervenes in time. The knight recognizes the boy as the failure who was engaged to Lise, but Alan didn't come for small talk. He wants Alfred back immediately, so he casts his magic spell to break the curse. After suffering the effect, Alfred thanks Alan for freeing him from the curse. Then he tells his niece that he's already dead, and that it wasn't his choice to attack her. Furthermore, in reality, the king doesn't have the thoughts he mentioned before. It's the work of demons. However, it's true that he hates the royal lineage. Being second in line for succession, many did everything to get his attention, and some even tried to destroy his relationship with his own brother. For these and other reasons, Alfred came to detest the snake's nest that is royalty and decided to abandon his position, starting a new life from scratch. In this new life, he had successes, like becoming vice captain of the First Order of Knights. But the truth is that in the end, the only peace he had was Lise. After telling the whole truth, Alfred announces that he's running out of time, so he asks Alan to take care of his beloved niece because despite being a good girl, she's sometimes reckless. Finally, he would like to challenge the boy to a duel because after all, Alan will be responsible for the man's greatest treasure, and he needs to know if the young man is worthy. So Alfred starts the fight not as a corpse, but as a man, a knight, and a father. From the start, the duel seemed balanced even though Alan wasn't holding back. Alfred reminds that today is the Spirits Festival, where the living and the dead mingle, and this clash is the best example of that. Like in a dream of just one night, this is the only chance to dance with those who will never return. Despite the friendly nature of the duel, Lise seems anxious, but in reality, she finally enters a state of mourning when she remembers another event where she asks Alfred if he will protect her from the evil monsters. In turn, the knight promises that he will, but jokes that only until someone stronger than him appears on the way. Back to reality, Lise has the chance to finally say goodbye to her uncle, and he has the chance to apologize for leaving her like this, although he swears he's okay because he's leaving knowing that she was a true daughter to him. When she called him father, he had to struggle to hide the joy, and that was very difficult. Finally, Lise takes the hand of her stepfather and says she loves him, while Alfred finally departs for the last time. With the end of the festival, Alan quietly observes the village around him. When the local leader questions when he found out everything, Alan tells him that he knew all along that the town was full of the dead and that the leader controlled them all. However, Alan didn't want to get involved in it because the fact that the living and the dead coexist doesn't change the fact that this village is peaceful. The old man questions whether a city can really be at peace under the leadership of a demon, but the boy finds it too simplistic to presume that all demons are naturally evil. However, it seems that this gentleman doesn't stray far from the rule, so he hopes that the human knight will become an excellent pawn in his collection. As soon as the demon pits his undead against Alan, He cuts the threads that bind the zombies to the control of the village leader. Then, with the 2-in-1 charge, he cuts down any and all adversaries in front of him and then collects the blue stone that the old man dropped. With that, the demon serving the ducal family of Westfeld is forced to report another failure on his part, and Brett finds it absurd. His father rebukes him and comments that letting a little girl escape won't hinder the plans. Brett agrees because, unlike the demon, he did his part and brought the archbishop's head. The next day, as Lee seems shaken, Beatrice makes it clear that she will always be by her side. Observing the blue stone, Alan identifies his brother Brett's power in it. Curiously, the only part that still belonged to Alfred was the head, and the head of the murdered general disappeared. Connecting the dots, Alan discovers what's behind it. Suddenly, Lees receives the message that General Searle has returned, and soon the three are surprised by the news. In the next scene, reminiscing about his childhood, Brett followed the funeral of who, according to him, was the kindest woman to ever set foot in this world. On that day, all he could feel was fear in the face of such an apathetic scene. Ever since then, upon returning to normal life, which always has to go on, all his father felt for him was disdain and pity every day. In the corridors of the Westfeld Duchy mansion, Brett heard the maid's comments always praising his brother Alan while he felt sidelined. Unconsciously or not, the boy began to vent his hatred for the world on his brother, who never treated him with contempt, projecting his father's figure onto him, who saw Brett as a failure. Soon, Brett wakes up from this nightmare and goes to greet Craig, the Lord of Westfeld, who, despite acknowledging his youngest son's greeting, only has eyes for his revenge plan against this kingdom and the gods. Under the resentful gaze of Brett, who believes himself to be the only one worthy of wearing the crown. Meanwhile, through the streets and places around the kingdom of Adostella, the rumor of General Sella's return, who supposedly was dead, spreads through the mouths and ears of the population far and wide. According to Clark, vice captain of the 1st Squadron of Knights, rumors spread like any gossip should, but it seems like this one is spreading too fast. Faced with this, he would like to know from Captain Edward if he thinks it's really Searle who's back or just some kind of imposter. The captain believes that whatever it is, it doesn't change what the 1st Squadron must do, which is to prevent those who wish to harm the kingdom. In Edward's opinion, that's exactly what the general would do, and it's up to them to uphold the will of the man who dedicated his life to protecting this kingdom. Arriving at an alley in the city, the two officers are surprised by a figure hidden by a cloak, but who soon reveals himself to be the Archbishop. Captain Edward questions what this man is doing in such a place without an escort, so he replies that he would like to share information alone with the captain elsewhere. Clark warns the man not to go, but Edward needs to prioritize gathering information in this delicate moment, so he leaves his subordinate responsible for protecting the kingdom and goes away. After some time, the captain and the archbishop arrive at the castle training grounds, but instead of saying what he promised, the old man disappears from sight, until suddenly Lord Westfeld appears, ready to strike the captain from behind. Edward blocks the attack in time and soon mentions the sudden bloodthirstiness of his old acquaintance, Craig Westfeld. Since Craig's wife's death, Edward has never seen the man again, and the captain knows well that Craig is the kind of friend who attacks others from behind, as everyone saw, so he demands to know his intentions. However, Craig just smiles and comments that the archbishop is on his side, then attacks Edward once again, starting a new duel in the same place where the two crossed swords so many times, to the point of generating a certain nostalgia in the Duke of Westfeld. However, Craig no longer needs this world, and that means Edward is also no longer necessary. Meanwhile, Brett remembers again the same funeral that dictated his family's fate, and it was there when the innocent child asked his brother why his mommy was sleeping. Alan tells him that she died, and that happens to everyone someday. While crying, the youngest holds his older brother's hand to feel some kind of comfort amidst the glaring suffering, and in the days that followed after his mother's departure, Brett just wanted to understand what it means to be a failure, and if he was one, and Alan tried to convince the boy that others' arbitrary judgment is worthless. However, Brett reveals that it's not just anyone who considers him a failure, but his own father, so he thinks his brother is lying and continues to suffer from Craig's harsh words. Over the years, Brett struggled to level up and be recognized by his father, which happened to some extent, but Craig's insults now targeted his brother Alan. Since then, Brett revolted because Alan didn't care about being seen as useless or make an effort to change that situation. So one day, Brett told the boy to his face that he deserved to be a heir of Westfeld, not Alan. Alan calmly responds that he knows the youngest well enough to know he'll be fine, but if he decides to go down the wrong path, perhaps nothing can be done to reverse his fate. Suddenly, an informant demon appears in front of Brett, informing him that negotiations on his side are going smoothly, so he asks about Brett's side. The boy warns that he used the archbishop to betray Edward, but the informant warns that that captain's gift is to nullify any gift within a mile radius, which befits his nickname, Disaster. Anyway, Brett isn't worried because his father is dealing directly with him, and in the worst-case scenario, Brett can use his gift without being affected by Edward. At that moment, another informant appears saying that the hero has appeared, so it's time to face the first squadron of knights. So before leaving, the first informant states that they are lending their strength to the Westfeld, so no failure will be tolerated, but Brett is sure he won't fail, unlike his failed brother. Meanwhile, in the middle of the city, Akira asks Sarah to be careful not to separate from her and end up disappearing from sight. When Sarah hugs the heroine tightly so that this never happens, Akira says that when the dust settles, she will find a safe place where the girl can live without fear. As they continue on their way, the two are being watched by shadowy figures surrounding the city until Akira gets tired of playing hide and seek and, away from the rest of the crowd, demands that the shadows reveal themselves. Faced with the enemies, the heroine explains that it's not difficult to track such an intense thirst for blood, but anyway, she emphasizes that none of them are capable of defeating her. In turn, the demons agree that they wouldn't stand a chance, but only if Akira were alone, which is not the case. So one of the demons applies the same symbol to Sarah that they imposed on the inhabitants of that cursed village, which uses the lives of the bearers as fuel for an explosion. In other words, with a simple fireball, Sarah will explode into the air like dynamite, so Akira must choose between staying and being killed alongside the girl, or fleeing and leaving her behind. Since the heroine chose the first option, soon fireballs are thrown at the two humans. Patrolling the surroundings of Stella, a member of the first squadron informs Clark, the vice captain, that he looks pale. Being honest, Clark confesses that he is quite worried about the captain, although everyone believes he can handle himself. At this moment, a demon manifests itself in front of the soldiers, and Clark doesn't know what to do because he knows he is not capable of dealing with this enemy with the forces he has at the moment. However, the demon reveals that it has nothing against the soldiers and is willing to tell the truth about this world. Meanwhile, the Archbishop appears on the balcony of the royal palace accompanied by General Cyril for a speech to the population, which gathers happily for the return of the famous general. Controlled by Brett's puppeteer gift, Cyril apologizes for causing so much commotion in the past few days, but now intends to bring the truth to everyone. Then the Archbishop asserts that the gods have been lying all this time because, in reality, the gifts are not blessings they grant, but rather a curse for life. Cyril cites the example of the majority of the people who wish to have a simple life as humble bakers, artisans, or maybe a clerk to travel the world in freedom, yet none of them ever had the right to choose the gift they received. On the contrary, these gifts are evil tools that the gods use to control the people like mere puppets. However, the Archbishop reveals that there is a way to break free from slavery, and that is only by giving up their gifts so that everyone can be masters of their own destiny. Faced with this unexpected speech, the people go into a tailspin to see their entire societal structure turn upside down in a minute, but Cyril claims to have the answer to all these doubts by bringing Brett Westfeld to the forefront. First, Brett points to a magical life form right behind the citizens, while Cyril emphasizes that this monster has the strength of 10,000 soldiers, as well as no weak points in its defense. Second, Brett, with his puppeteer gift, can control this creature so that it can protect the kingdom without the need for divine gifts. On the contrary, as the Archbishop tells, Westfeld's puppeteer gift is still capable of extracting latent abilities in others, awakening powers that remain dormant in the bodies of all, even stronger than the outdated gifts. Seeing that the public remains confused, Brett confesses that not everything can be done without gifts, and that's why he brought out a figure that can meet the needs of a difficult day. So when the demonic beast is revealed, the population panics in the face of such a hideous and notoriously evil figure. Still, Brett states that the kingdom has managed to establish a cooperative relationship with the demons, and it was through them that humans could discover the truth about the imprisonment of the gifts offered by the gods. Therefore, it will be the demons themselves who will give everyone the powers that will replace the gifts, restoring to men their desired independence. In his final speech, Brett calls on the people of Stella to live together the destiny they choose for themselves, and as everyone applauded the youngest Westfeld, the more adoration he desired, while feeling in his veins the sweet pride of his own ego. Meanwhile, his father still engages in an intense battle against the captain of the first squadron, and even though managing to nullify the opponent's gift, Edward is about to be defeated. Faced with this, Craig reinforces his point of view, arguing that gifts were never the main strength of a man, but rather the level he reaches by elevating the status of his spirit, which elevates the individual and makes him truly close to the gods, so close that it makes a human capable of killing a god. As for the vice captain, upon hearing the supposed truth, he draws his sword along with the first squadron, fulfilling his role as the shield of the people. At this point, the demon disappears and knocks down the soldiers one by one. In a short time, Clark had been hit, and at this moment the demon returns thinking the man would surrender, but Clark honors his title of knight by giving his life for the kingdom, while the demon laughs at the soldier's ignorance. However, before the death of the vice captain could be realized, Beatrice approaches and agrees with the demon about warriors being ignorant sometimes, including herself usually. Meanwhile, Edward has finally been subdued while Crate accuses the captain of being unworthy. Suddenly, a demon appears in the room, but when questioned about its mission, this demon attacks Crate and reveals to be accurate in fact. Hours ago, when the fireballs were launched at her and Sarah, the magical seal that Alan had placed on the girl was activated, protecting her and the heroine with a protective shield. Back on the balcony of the hall, Brett announces the end of human slavery to make way for the era of the real power of men, but Alan is seen among the crowd, generating hatred from his brother. Alan examines Beatrice's demeanor in the kingdom's surroundings while she accuses the demons and the Duchy of Westphalt of executing the general and attempting to kidnap Princess Lise. On the other hand, the demon has no doubt that all these humans will soon be underground, so he decides to reveal the truth as a funeral gift. As he begins to speak, Mylene activates a listening device while remaining invisible, and the demon's speech is broadcast through speakers near the palace. The demon confesses that powerful gifts like those of the general and the princess are obstacles to his race, which values domination, so they want to convince humans to give up their gifts on their own. Desperate, Brett acts as if his brother were doing all this just to provoke him, then shouts for Alan to stop ruining his plan, causing the population to hear the word plan and become even more suspicious of the boy who presented himself as the savior of the nation. Furthermore, Princess Lise herself appears and reveals that the attempted execution against her did indeed occur at the hands of magical life forms like those Brett presented today as protectors of the kingdom. With no more chances to deceive the people, Brett laughs and asserts that Alan has meddled where he wasn't called, and then uses his puppeteer gift to control the guards, but Alan prevents the power at the right moment by cutting the strings emanating from the villain and knocking down the soldiers, the archbishop, and the general all at once. Faced with this, Brett has no choice but to appeal to the magical creatures he created, so chaos ensues in the capital square, causing people to run desperately for their lives. Seeing this catastrophe around him, Alan partially blames himself for not having been able to take care of his brother enough to prevent this tragedy. But at the same time, he remembers well that it was Brett himself who refused Alan's outstretched hand when there was time. This time, Brett tries to throw his magical strings to control his brother, but Alan pulls the strings onto himself and punches his brother, who came straight from the impulse to his fist, stunning him. Afterward, Lise welcomes a lost little girl in the midst of the incident, while Alan warns that he will deal with one more pending issue. Lise asks if it won't be too painful to deal with it, and this question triggers a memory in the boy when his father despised him for thinking his son was a failure, but this doesn't stop the boy from confirming that he will be fine. Meanwhile, Beatrice and Mylene bravely fight the demon while remaining invisible to try to equalize the battle. The demon recognizes the Amazon as the girl Horus created, but Beatrice corrects that now Mylene is a loyal ally of Edo Stella. Anyway, the demon reflects that if the other warrior standing there is as strong as the Amazon, it would be better to escape. Thus, the entity opens a portal to flee the scene, but Mylene throws a precise knife to interrupt the enemy, and soon Beatrice stakes her sword into the demon's chest and destroys him. After the conflict, Clark says he would like to ask many questions to the princess's bodyguard, and then bows to thank the old friend for her assistance. So Beatrice is pleased with the reunion, but asserts that there is no time for reminiscing now because the demons are attacking various points of the capital and causing terror to the entire helpless population. Faced with this, the first squadron of knights rises again to fulfill its role as the kingdom's shield and its people until a familiar blacksmith appears, bringing some weapons to reinforce the defense forces. Then Clark and his soldiers thank the effort of the elf Noelle, who brought everything she could to arm the resistance soldiers. Meanwhile, Akira is amazed at the supernatural movement of the opponent, who acts as if he knows what they will do next. Edward explains that Craig Westphalt uses his gift, Funeral Agent, to see the future and anticipate the attacks he will receive, and the man's bloodlust makes the captain of the first squadron shout that Mariel would never approve of this. This simple statement strikes a chord in the man who at that moment remembers predicting her death countless times with his gift and even saving her as many times as he could. In the end, she's still left in the same way without anything being done. For this reason, the Duke believes that his wife was merely a toy in the hands of the cursed gods, and soon she, with the title Holy Mother, was destined to be the mother of a hero. But instead, she conceived a failure who didn't even receive a gift. So the more his eyes bled, the more Craig cursed the god's fate that imposed death on his wife, and for that reason, he wants to devastate everything in front of him as a way to diminish the pain. On the other hand, Akira thinks the man is acting like a child and mocks the fact that he can't accept that he lost someone dear, and as he accepts that he is indeed paying too much attention to unnecessary details, Craig trades the light of his life force for the pure manifestation of diabolic power. Akira tries to act before it's too late, but Craig casts a spell before the heroine could react. She then invokes the blue lightning technique to combat the enemy's spell. However, the man-demon's ability was so great that Akira ends up losing the contest and is thrown forcefully against the wall. Edward warns Duke Westfelt that the excess of this diabolic power will destroy his own identity, but Craig is completely consumed by greed, so he uses his darkness to engulf Edward, causing the captain to be sucked into the macabre interior of the man-demon's consciousness, where Edward feels the sadness and resentment of his old friend. Because of this, he cries and asks for forgiveness from Craig for something, which for a second makes him stop the spell, and it seemed that Craig had returned to his original form, but then he plunges his sword into Edward's belly and brings him down forever. Faced with his own actions, Craig goes mad and shouts that no one will pretend to understand what goes on inside him anymore. Akira responds that that man thought of his friend until his last breath, but Craig doesn't care about any of that anymore, so he decrees that now it's the heroine's turn to die, only for Alan to arrive in time to prevent the impact with his magical sword made by Noel. Among all the people involved in this war, Craig finds it amusing that it's his own failed son who's trying to stop him. Alan admits he preferred to be someone else in his son's place, but fears that might not be possible. Thus, all the father can show his son is the same old contempt, seeing him merely as another obstacle, conjuring another spell against the boy. Even though Craig has taken an extremely powerful form, Alan manages to defend against the spell with his sword, dealing a blow to his father's inflated ego, who questions who this kid really is, as his failed son would never do this. In response, Alan explains that Craig himself has already revealed who he is, but regardless whether failed or not, there are still people depending on him around the kingdom, so he must honor his mother's name, who would never have wanted any of this to happen. Consumed by his vanity, hearing the name of his beloved wife from the mouth of the son he despises was the last straw for the Duke of Westfelt, unleashing his deepest wrath to teach Alan never to speak Muriel's name again. Thus, he casts such a powerful spell against the boy that it throws him into the darkness of his own world, where Alan plunges through the murky waters of his father's mind. Feeling trapped within the ice, Alan feels despair coursing through his veins as memories of a distant past are brought to him from the outside, revealing that ultimately Craig Westfelt was passionately in love with Muriel, and Alan never got to know this side of the Duke. On the contrary, all he received from his progenitor was disdain, if not indifference. In these moments of mourning when they're vulnerable, people change their behavior, and Alan felt it firsthand when Brett refused his help on that fateful day. In the end, he himself turned his back on everything to avoid emotionally involving himself in life's situations, trying to shield himself from the world's pains. Yet some people embraced the young man in the midst of darkness and made him believe again that there is still light in the darkness. With this in mind, Alan frees himself from his father's mental prison and upon returning to the surface, invokes a technique from the end of the world called Demon-Slaying Sword, along with the blossoming of 100 flowers, which violently strike Craig Westfelt and worsen the bleeding in his eyes. Even more enraged, Craig surrenders more of himself to demonic power, losing more of his own identity. The awakening of this unprecedented power generates a hurricane that provokes a storm, and the clouds gradually cover the kingdom of Adostella. Still, despite the chaos engulfing the city, Lee seeks to maintain the population's hope, trying to convince everyone that Alan will save the capital in time. Back to the Demon Man, Akira comments that no human is capable of defeating what Craig has become, and Alan replies that if that's the case, then this is a job for him. With that said, he attacks with his special ability, Beam of Light, in an attempt to break through the hurricane. But the deep impact carries the boy to the magical manifestation of his father's wrath, who screamed within an energy sphere as if wanting to escape or be killed at once. Confronted with his father's suffering, Alan considers that perhaps they are more alike than he imagined, because fleeing from the pain of abandonment isn't so different from being trapped within oneself by anger. Thinking this, Alan realizes that maybe he was wrong from the start, so he thanks his father for the lesson as he plunges his sword into the surface of that morbid expanse. The impact brings the man consumed by hatred back to the world, and he even manages to return the Duke to a more human form. But a beautiful magical butterfly approaches and lands on the Duke's hand, then his body begins to disintegrate. As he slowly disappears forever, Craig Westfelt asserts that his failed son fulfilled his destiny, and in a final breath, he cries for his eternal Muriel. Thus, the man's ashes are soon carried away by the butterfly into the skies. After all this event, Alan is rewarded with the title of Duke of Westfelt, but he respectfully declines to the surprise of everyone present except one. Afterward, the king, along with an advisor, reveals that none of this matters because he already knew this would happen. In an old memory, the king recalls that his beloved Lise adored little Alan, and the two were inseparable, so he rejoices that Alan protected his two most precious possessions, the kingdom and his daughter. Later, Mylene questions if Alan will go to Granholm until Lise arrives to reunite with her friends and asks to go along with them. After all, she's now called Lise Westfeld, and she has to take care of her lands too. Mylene is surprised because the princess inherited the lands of Westfeld, while Alan comments that what's done is done. As for Beatrice, who was originally a personal guard of the royal family, she was released from service because Lise is no longer part of the family, even though the woman is trying everything to serve the princess again. Thus, Lise is on her own, and she makes it clear that she would feel safer in Alan's company. The boy realizes that there are people in this world who still need him even if he is a failure, so the princess pulls him into the carriage from where they will depart for the rest of their young lives wherever the wind takes them. Hey folks, if you're digging this anime and want to see more, drop a like down below and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We need your support to hit 90,000 subscribers. Every subscription counts and helps us grow our community. Catch you in the next one.